Welcome to my podcast. I'm Sandra Rupp, and I am an executive coach for career, life, and leadership. Today, we're going to talk about the election in the United States of America. I'm excited to share some insights that you may not have heard from anyone else about the election, Davos men, President Trump, Kamala Harris. And I want everyone to understand that the mainstream media is run primarily by 6 corporations, the big media, the TV networks, local stations. A lot of them were acquired by companies based in New York. I know a lot about this because my father was a founder of the broadcasting industry. And the media has changed so dramatically from the 1980s when I first voted for president. That was Reagan. In the 80s, there were probably 50 to 60 owners of the media in the U.S. And then what happened is a lot of the companies were sold to the big 6, so to speak. And so you have about 6 corporations that now own the media. They're all run by left-wing CEOs. And so what you have to understand is if you watch big media, which I actually don't anymore, I am much more interested in following podcasts and video channels on YouTube like my own and other people who have a lot of real world experience and insights on what's really going on, but we may not be hired by the big media because we don't fit into the propaganda that they're trying to push. So today I want to talk about some of the secrets of Donald Trump and how they went after him, because I want to expose the truth and what I know based on experience. I lived in New York for almost 20 years and worked there, and I have met Donald and Melania on a couple of occasions. They're lovely people. They are as professional as you can imagine, and so much of what I heard in the media was so different than my own experience. I was dating a gentleman in New York, and we went to his brother's house in Greenwich one weekend. His brother and his sister-in-law's home in Greenwich. And I learned in the car ride out there that his brother was one of the top bankers to Donald Trump. This gentleman was incredibly polished, sophisticated. He was from I believe North Carolina, had gone to UVA for business school, just a very polished gentleman from Greenwich, and he was one of Trump's bankers. And I thought to myself, well, that's really impressive. I am impressed to meet one of Trump's bankers. So having had some of this experience, I also, followed the Apprentice show like a lot of you, and was intrigued by, Trump going from building these beautiful hotels like the Plaza, or owning these hotels like the Plaza Hotel, refurbishing it in such a grand style and making it another gem as it was, building Trump Tower, and bought the John DeLorean estate. Actually, I used to spend summers. There were a number of homes on the John DeLorean estate out in Bedminster, New Jersey. And I actually had spent weekends out there with a group of friends who rented a house on the property. So we wanted to experience the horse country, and it was we did that primarily in the fall, but it was very nice to have a place to get away to and cook dinners. And so we actually met John DeLorean, and then one day we heard that the property was now sold to Trump, and it became the Trump golf course in Bedminster, where he spends a lot of time now. He also had opened up the country club at Mar-a-Lago, and what was really interesting about that is Donald Trump was the first person in Palm Beach to open up a country club to diversity people, minorities of all kinds. And so it was, country clubs during that time period, back in that time period where he bought Mar-a-Lago, were rather unfair in terms of not being open-minded about who they let into their club. I think that country clubs have always, had a challenge with being open-minded, and Donald Trump was the first person with a club in the Palm Beach area to open it up to a much wider group of people. It didn't matter what your religion was, what your race was. And so when he decided to throw his hat into the ring for president, it just was exciting. Because, he had been on the Oprah show. My father had actually been on the King World Board and helped make Oprah successful in her show. And my father and mother had also met President Trump. And what was interesting was that he had talked about one day, if he needed to, he might run for president, but he really enjoyed having his business. And he had a very thriving business. He didn't, need to go out and do this. And that was why we needed him, really, because many of the founding fathers were self-made, and that actually makes for a better candidate for president because they can't be bought off. And that's a really key point for everyone to understand. You want someone to run for president who already has made it so that they cannot be bought off. And my concern with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is that they potentially have been bought and paid for. And Biden was too. I remember when Biden went into the vice president position, they said his assets were like $100,000, which I thought, well, my gosh, that's so low. And then all of a sudden he's worth, tens of millions of dollars. And I just find the whole thing really disturbing because I've had some time to spend at World Economic Forum following their conference at Davos. I've had a lot of interface with meeting influential CEOs through my executive career and also in my personal and professional life. And I just find it very shocking because when Donald Trump threw his hat into the ring, I was actually the first to say that, there are 10 candidates on the Republican side, but he's going to be the candidate. And people looked at me like, what are you talking about? He's not even a politician. I said, that's great. That's why he's going to get it. And sure enough, he did get the nomination in 2016. And I had predicted I was one of the first people. It was my Thinkers 50 video of the summer. I think it was July. And I predicted that he would be the candidate and be successful in winning, which he did. I always saw Trump as someone who could bring both sides together. He's relatable. I would call him the blue-collar billionaire. He's someone who his father and mother had a home in Queens, even though they were very successful in real estate. It wasn't like, he was to the manner born. I mean, he was born in New York City and Queens area and grew up and then eventually developed this persona of, being a very well-to-do billionaire in his own right. But Trump is an impressive person. And one thing that I found when I met the gentleman who was his banker, it was during that time where Trump, had some financial issues because of the economy. Well, Trump was too big to fail long before anyone else. And so because he was so successful and because he was so tied into the banks through his real estate ownership, he really was too big to fail. So the banks had to work with him. And so he had a keen insight into this concept of being too big to fail. So when you're too big to fail, you have to do a lot of negotiations. And that's when he wrote The Art of the Deal. He appeared on, created this whole Apprentice. He and Mark Burnett created this whole Apprentice show. And then when he threw his hat into the ring for president, as Joe Rogan has just pointed out in his podcast, the ladies on The View were very welcoming to him. But as soon as they found out that he was actually running for president, it's like all of their bosses, at the big networks, told these anchors not to support Trump, and they turned on him. And it was just so remarkable because he had built up all these relationships with people over many, many years, and they were friends, and all of a sudden people were turning on him because he was running for president. And what that showed me was that they were afraid of him. He was speaking the truth to power. I liked what he said. I could see that he was being genuine. I knew that he hired a lot of women in the Trump organization as managers and executives, and he was a fair boss. So I liked him. He always admired, strong women. He's got strong women in his family. And Melania is very intelligent, speaks multiple languages, I believe 6. And in addition to being beautiful, is also very, very bright. So I really thought that it was interesting to me when I was very involved at that time when he decided to run with this Thinkers 50 group and getting to know the people attending Davos. And as soon as I expressed my support for Trump, some of these people turned on me as if there was something wrong with me for supporting Trump, like I was this horrible person. And they had this fake narrative about what he said about Charlottesville, and I investigated it, and I found out that the guy that created the Charlottesville event had actually visited the White House, was related to the Obama administration, and had put out this notice to all these different right groups, so to speak. It was called Unite the Right. But he invited the Ku Klux Klan and asked them to stand at the front of the line. He got CNN to come film it. And then all these nice people in the back who were truly just Republicans were being, positioned by CNN as if all these people were Trump followers who support the Ku Klux Klan. And the whole thing was such a scam because it was organized by an Obama person. So I knew at that point when these Davos CEOs were saying on CNBC that Trump was this horrible person because of that, I'm like, these people are just making this up as they go along. Just like the Stormy Daniels case, I'm going to tell you something that is very important for you to know. If a billionaire gets into trouble with a woman like Stormy Daniels, let's say, probably doesn't happen very often because they have lots of other type women who will go out with them. He didn't need to go out with a porn star, believe me. And Trump was always very careful with germs and, didn't even like shaking hands for a long time. So I just don't believe the story at all on a practical level. But more importantly, if there had been any relationship between Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump, the payoff would have been a lot more than $100,000 or $150,000. I mean, it's just silly that anyone would think that they had a relationship, because if they had had a relationship, the payoff would have been in the 7 figures. It would have been at least $1 million. And anyone who knows anything about these situations would know this. So I want to just tell you that a lot of these stories about Trump are manufactured by people that want to stop Trump from being president, and they're meant to fool you. And that's really an important point for all of you to know. So many of the stories that have been released by the big media, the left-wing media, are made up, they're manufactured, and then they're put out there by PR firms, and everything's it's communicated the same on all these channels. You can play back these news anchors and they all say the same thing because they all got the same talking points, but it's all made up. So the Stormy Daniels is an example of that. The Charlottesville is an example of that. Another example would be the E. Jean case, okay? I can tell you from having been to Bergdorf Goodman many times that that scenario is not realistic. First of all, Trump says that he has never met this woman, E. Jean. She's not really his type. And if they were at Bergdorf Goodman, I mean, Trump would have been surrounded by a bodyguard, and the store is very particular about who goes into the dressing rooms. It would have never happened. None of this happened the way that you heard it. And so what they did is they make up these situations and then they indict Trump on false charges because they've placed these, judges who will kind of go along with the program. But they're appointed by left-wing people, and Soros has probably funded some of this. And you can look up more of the details, but so many of these things, including the E. Jean story, the Stormy Daniels story, and the Charlottesville story, were not true about President Trump. So if you're calling him a rapist, you are going down the wrong path. You are not well informed. And it's so sad to me that highly intelligent women believe these stories, but it just shows you how naive people are. I can tell you from a lot of experience, what happened with the New York Times when I was working in executive search, if a CEO got into trouble with a woman in the office and he was married, there'd be a payoff, and it wouldn't be $150,000. But let me tell you that the next thing they would do is get their PR person to put a story in the New York Times that the CEO was such a promoter of women in leadership. I mean, that was always the game, right? They get into trouble, and then we need to clean up their image. And so it's more fake news. So it was very interesting. I saw that happen 3 times, and I realized what was going on with the New York Times. I don't read it anymore. I haven't read it for 20 years. I'm very careful with what I read, and I do read a lot of international publications. I like the Financial Times, I like the Wall Street Journal, but I take everything with a grain of salt these days because I know that a lot of these stories are manufactured. So I have to go to podcasts and YouTube channels of people that I know are independent journalists. And I think independent journalism is really taking over at this point, and Elon Musk is helping us do that because we can write what we want on X, we can say what we want. And it's really wonderful that Elon Musk has done this. And I was actually talking to one of the most prominent CEOs at the time. He's now retired from being CEO. But he was a Davos CEO, European-based, and he was on his way to Blenheim Palace when Donald Trump came to Blenheim Palace to meet Theresa May was the prime minister, and a group of CEOs attended. This man was one of them. I was texting him from his town car, and he asked me about, how are we going to get Trump to agree on climate change? And I said, well, the problem you're going to have here is that he doesn't believe in the Paris Accord. And the reason he doesn't believe in the Paris Accord is because it's a socialist agreement. Well, this man admitted to me that his views, this European CEO, shocked me by saying that his views were closer, his own, to communism. And he actually co-wrote the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations. And I realized that this man was so far off how America was ever going to take this in, because from our view, we have done a good job on many things related to the environment. Republicans recycle more than Democrats. But what we don't want is a Paris Accord, which is a socialist, possibly communist agreement that favors India and China. I mean, India and China have lots of money and have to clean up their own mess. We're not going to finance that. Now, we can help some of the smaller countries, but I said to him that he should just get to know Trump and President Trump and Melania Trump. And so they had the dinner, and he comes out of the event. I'm in Florida. He's in the UK. He texted me again from the car, and he said, well, we talked to Trump, and he is not interested in the Paris Accord. And so he said, we're done with Trump. Okay, well, this is very interesting to me. So we're done with Trump. The next thing I hear is that George Soros is speaking at World Economic Forum at Davos, and he's saying that Trump will not be reelected. So I found this really interesting because at that point, I knew what they were up to. And in 2020, the election was rigged. It was rigged by a gentleman named Mark Malloch Brown, who was chairman of Smartmatic. He's now head of Soros's foundation. But he had worked in the PR business and had gotten these machines into Venezuela and rigged that election. Smartmatic had used Dominion voting system software. You can look all this up. Some of it is very interesting. If you follow the dots, and Patrick Byrne can help you do that. He's the former CEO of Overstock, very smart guy. He and I have traded notes on this. But by getting this Dominion and Smartmatic software into the U.S. in the 6 swing states, that's where they did it, they were able to rig the 2020 election. What we're hoping this time is the election is just way too big to rig because it's such a landslide. And if they try to rig it again, my guess is they're going to get caught, and there's going to be some very bad news for a lot of highly influential people. By the way, they are already indicting Bill Gates in the Netherlands, as well as the CEO of Pfizer, Alex Borla, for misrepresentation on these COVID vaccines. So there are a lot of things that are going to come down in the next few months. And I just want you to all know that you can watch my other videos on COVID. Yes, there was a virus, but they released it to scare people into staying into their homes, which was not necessary. And the whole thing was overblown. Some people didn't have it. If you tested positive, it didn't mean that you had COVID. If you didn't have any symptoms, you probably never had COVID. Okay, so they really rigged the whole system. I don't believe in a lot of what happened. It was a typical psyop. I've seen it before. If you want to understand what a psyop is, watch Wag the Dog, that movie. It was about political campaigns. I think it was actually created during the Clinton administration. And it'll tell you how the media works with politicians to rig stories in newspapers and, create media and videos of things that are not even real. And now with AI, it's so easy to do that. Speaking of the Clinton administration, when he passed those 2 bills, he deregulated Glass-Steagall, the banks, and then he also passed the Telecom Act of '96. Basically, those 2 moves were to consolidate banks, the banking system, and the media into the hands of a handful of liberal CEOs. And so Trump is trying to break this up. He's our man. This is the guy that we need on our team to protect freedom. You can watch my video where I'm on camera about all the freedoms that we need to protect. He's better for the economy. I mean, the top 2 issues right now, according to a poll that I just saw, are for American voters are inflation, the cost of food and gas rising, as well as protecting freedom of speech. Now, if those are your top 2 issues, then you're voting for President Trump, obviously, because Biden and Harris have created all this inflation. They don't know how to run the economy. They've had terrible economic advisors. President Trump will bring in the bigwigs. President Trump will bring in the right people in the bigwigs and get the economy back on track. He's talking about limiting the income taxes and creating a very different system that could be very beneficial for average Americans. So I just want everyone to know that there's a lot of hope ahead, but we have to get past the evil that these left-wing billionaires are trying to create for us. And do not trust the mainstream media. I think that's the key message today, because they are releasing so many false stories about Donald Trump, his campaign, and he's actually a really good guy. No one's perfect. He may be a little bit rough around the edges sometimes for some people, but he has a heart of gold. He's survived 2 assassination attempts. The man is unbelievable in terms of his energy level. He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. He works for you, the American people. And he is by far the best candidate, the best president of my lifetime. And so that's saying a lot, because we had Ronald Reagan. I would put him as number 2. But I believe that Donald Trump has been the best president of my lifetime and will win this election and go on to be the best president going forward as well. And on that note, I just want to close with kind of an interesting side note, which is I was looking at the astrology predictions and psychic predictions on YouTube for this election. And there's a top astrologer who's very, very good. And she has studied the charts of President Trump and J.D. Vance and Harris and Waltz. And she said that she believes that it will be a Trump victory. Both Trump and Vance have certain planets in the 10th house, which is the house of career. Good luck there. And on election day, they will win. And that doesn't mean that it's all like smooth sailing from there, because she said there will be, fights. There will be people that will try to stop it. So we need to be relentless from voting day until January, when he is going through the inauguration. We need to be very supportive of President Trump. And I want to invite everyone to start, watching good media, and that really is independent media. If you want to watch some good channels, look at mine, Sandra Rupp on YouTube. I'm at Exec Career Coach on X. You can also contact me on LinkedIn for executive coaching. But if you want to look at some others, there are a lot of, especially female journalists out there that are, launching amazing shows. Megyn Kelly being one of them, of course. And there are a number of others that you should check out. I really want to support President Trump in every way that I can, because to me, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And I really have to put myself out there. It's not easy to do. And a lot of people are afraid to post anything on Facebook about politics. They don't want to upset, people at their company or in their social circle. But I decided that my country was more important than worrying about what other people think. So for me, as a leader, I have to speak my truth. And I've always been able to speak truth to power. It's something that I learned to do from, attending one of the top business schools in the world, the Kellogg School. And you have to be very clear on what the truth is, and that right now involves reading, in my case, probably 20 different publications on a weekly basis. But I can kind of read through what's the truth and what isn't the truth. And I also go to the original videotapes. So as an example, with the whole Charlottesville story, I went to the original speech that Trump gave, and I realized that, NBC News had edited out the important points of what he said. So these are the things that you really have to understand, that a lot of these anchors on the TV networks are not telling you the truth. And even Fox now, the son, Lachlan, has more of a liberal background. So we really have to, perhaps find different channels. I've been watching Newsmax a little bit more, Right Side Broadcasting, OANN, News Nation, I think is another one. And I think when Trump wins, which I believe he will win, I think the media will change dramatically, because no one's going to want to watch all the negativity anymore. And hopefully we'll move into a much more positive time. That's my hope anyway. And I just want to say, on the January 6th thing from last time around, that also was what I call a psyop. And I have recorded videos about that. That was very much a wag the dog story. But we know that they waved the Trump supporters in. They did it intentionally. The Trump supporters had no reason to stop the Senate deliberations, because they wanted to have the Senate deliberations. They wanted the Senate deliberations so that the votes could be turned over in certain states. So it was the Democrats who wanted to stop the Senate deliberations, and they did that by waving Trump supporters in and then trying to make it look like the Trump supporters were the bad people, when in fact it was a psyop. I saw Antifa go in first. There's a video. It was the first video I saw on Twitter, and Jack Dorsey was actually on vacation, I think in French Polynesia, and I saw these videos and I'm like, it's Antifa going in first. This is not the Trump supporters. And then they waved the Trump supporters in. The whole thing was staged. I saw it with my own eyes. No one can tell me differently. And I know enough of the insiders to know what's really going on. So you would be very naive if you didn't think that this was the truth. And I want you all to really open your eyes, because I've been around a lot of male leaders in my life and female leaders. And when it comes to power and money, there are people that will do anything to take advantage of you. And I have a sixth sense for knowing when people are lying. It's part of what I was born with. I know how to do it. And through my sensitivity, my intuition is off the charts. And I can tell you that there are many people that are lying to the American public right now. It's being funded by Davos billionaires because their goal is to take down the United States. They want open borders so that the United States is no longer the most powerful country and the richest country. They want the U.S. to be maybe one of 6 countries. They want to take us way down. And the way they do that is by letting all of these immigrants, well, actually illegal immigrants, in through the open borders. And I even can tell you stories about the people funding that. It relates to George Soros. It relates to Ajay Banga, who was the CEO of MasterCard and is now the head of the World Bank. It relates to people like the CEO of Unilever, Paul Pullman, who helped work on the Paris Accord and the Sustainable Development Goals, who's friends with Lord Mark Malloch Brown. These people all know each other, and they have set out to bring the United States down. But I'm not going to let them. And I'm going to give you one last story, which is that my ancestors braved the Mayflower. It was William Brewster. He was the only reverend on the Mayflower, and he brought his wife and his 2 children. They braved the voyage on the Mayflower for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. That was why the Mayflowers people came to this beautiful land to found a country that was based on freedom of speech and freedom of religion. We are the only country that has that. We have that in part because of the right to bear arms. Because if I'm a history major, and in the Bolshevik Revolution, first thing that you learn is that when they take away your guns, they can then take away your freedom of speech. So that's why so many people are so adamant about the First and Second Amendment in the Constitution, because you need the guns, the right to bear arms against the government, to protect your freedom of speech. And you need your freedom of speech to make sure that there's not too much sameness thinking and you fall into communism. And there are so many terms being thrown around. Donald Trump is not fascist. He's nothing close to Hitler. He's got a daughter who's Jewish, as you all know, and his son-in-law. They have a beautiful family, Ivanka Trump, and her husband, Jared. And for people to say things like this, I mean, it's just disturbing that anyone on the news is even allowed to say something so ridiculous. I think that Donald Trump has a lot of strong support from my friends who are Jewish, because they like someone who believes in peace. The Muslim community in Michigan is now supporting Donald Trump because they believe in peace. And I think that you're going to find people in every category of religion, race, background who are going to be voting in droves for President Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump is the best president of my lifetime, and I would like to dedicate this podcast to Donald Trump 2024. I'm Sandra Rupp. I was placed on the Thinkers 50 radar list for the world's top business thinkers. I'm an executive coach. I've worked in executive search and media, And I'd like to tell you that leadership can look like this. Thanks for watching. Love you all. Don't forget to subscribe right here on YouTube.